Hey everybody, this is Alex Fabrega coming at you again with another Teaching Tips Tuesday. And how about you introduce yourself, Liz?
Yeah, so I'm Liz Burrel. I'm a teacher of the visually impaired, and I currently work in a couple school districts in suburban Philadelphia.
And you were a former Foundation for Blind Children TVI intern.
That is true. I am a
Forget about
former
that.
intern.
So I understand we are here to talk about supporting Braille instruction for students with autism.
Yeah, I'm really excited to talk about it. I think it's something that doesn't get talked about enough, considering there's many students that have both autism and visual impairment, or they have traits that are associated with autism as well. So I can't wait to talk about it. But as a kind of disclaimer, I just want to say that I've only been teaching for 2 years, and I've had extensive experience with a couple of students. So what works for one student might not work for another student. So take everything with a grain of salt, I would
Okay,
say.
no. All right, so let's say you just got a new student on your caseload. They're a Braille learner and they have been diagnosed with autism. What are your first intro steps?
So my very first step is getting to know the student as well as you can. And this doesn't just include their present levels for vision. It's things outside of that, like getting to know their preferred and non-preferred activities, their special interests, and just how they react to their daily schedule, as well as to any systems that are already in place. You can learn that from the IEP, of course, but it's always best, I feel, to really be there in person and get a feel for that student and get to know the team and the student themselves.
Absolutely. So you're talking about systems like a tactile calendar. You want to see how they're interacting with that in real life instead of just on paper.
Right, exactly. And also how their teacher in the autism support room implements their behavior plans and just what their schedule looks like in general. And once you know what the schedule looks like, then my suggestion usually is to plant yourself in one time that's the same, whether that's every week, every month, every cycle. It really depends on the student and the school, but just having that consistent time so that the student knows when to expect you and kind of what to expect as well.
Okay. So you've met the student, you've learned them well, you know their preferences, what's non-preferential, you have your scheduled time. How do you actually start supporting that Braille instruction?
So again, the first thing I'll go back to schedules again, but just having a set routine, whether that's the same thing every time, if you want to start with reading first, writing second, and then assistive technology after that. Some students will do well with a schedule like that that's always the same. Some students might be able to do different activities every day, but I always feel that it's so important to give them some kind of schedule, whether it's a tactile schedule or a visual schedule, depending on your learner, just so that they know what to expect from the vision support session in general.
So you set that up first. They know that they're going to work on reading their Braille, then writing their Braille. How would you integrate breaks into that schedule? And is it appropriate to?
Yeah, it's definitely super appropriate too, because it's one of the most important things you can do, which I keep saying, but um, it's, I think that using two different kinds of breaks. The two that I usually use is a preferred activity break and then a sensory break. So these can either be worked into the schedule. Usually I work at least my preferred activity breaks into the schedule. The sensory breaks you can also work in once you know the student. So for example, if you know that right after reading your student might need a body break, then you can give them that sensory break pre-planned. But also once you get to know your student, you get to know their body language and the signs and signals that they need a sensory break. So I give those both as needed and pre-scheduled into the plan, depending on the student and the day.
Okay. So it sounds like the biggest elements we've talked about so far are knowing that student well, consistency, 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 and effective integration of breaks.
Right. Um, and then we get to the fun stuff, which is actually teaching the Braille
Yeah.
eventually at some point. But something that I find is really helpful if you have a dual media learner is to really take advantage of that and use visuals. This might be a different opinion depending on the TVI that you ask, but the students that I've worked with have had exceptional visual memory that they have then been able to utilize when exploring tactile materials. So an alternative though could be like a swing cell or a pop cell, just giving some kind of model before you're asking them to read it or write it, and let them use that memory that in so many autistic people is extraordinary. But also integrating talents in Braille is super important as well. So you use those visuals, and that might be utilizing the student's talents for visual memory. But other examples could be creating songs, so like songs for word signs, or if the student is really great at memorizing numbers, great, have them memorize the numbers of the Braille dots in the cell. And using those interests to push forward Braille instruction and keep their interest. It's true of any student, but especially students with autism, using their special interests always makes it more tolerable for them.
Yeah. Braille
Yeah.
instruction is not always the most thrilling for students. I
No,
think we,
no, no.
we can all confidently say.
Yeah, I think so. But two things that are for Braille instruction itself, I think the two main things are to make it fun and to make it meaningful. So using those talents and interests and frequent breaks and praise, all of that together to make it fun and engaging and make the student want to learn Braille, which, like you said, isn't always every day. They're not going to come in like, wow, I really want to learn my strong contractions today. But just keeping it as fun as possible, to make it vision itself a preferred activity. And when you're able to do that, if you're able to do that, it makes Braille instruction so much easier for both the teacher and the student. And then making it meaningful using frequent and preferred activities. So using those interests not only to make it fun, but also to give relevance to the Braille that the student is learning. So integrating it across different environments, like if they have, a preferred corner or something that you would label the mat, and you would label, well, the beanbag's kind of soft, but labeling toy bins and things like that, things that the student likes, so that they realize, oh, this is how Braille is used. This is why I'm learning Braille, which for dual media learners especially can be super difficult.
Mhm.
So just integrating as much as possible and as much exposure as you can. Um, so yeah.
All right. Well, I have one more question for you today, and that is, what is your favorite part of your job?
My favorite part of my job is the students, and on top of that, because all of the students is all of our favorites, because I don't think writing IEPs is our favorite,
Speak for
is
yourself.
forming relationships with students that are meaningful and motivating for yourself and the student, and really just having a rapport that makes that student want to come in for you, but also makes you want to come in for that student every day. Um, so can't get enough of that.
Absolutely. Good answer.
Yeah,
All
thank
right. Well,
you.
thank you so much for being on today, Liz. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And thank you all at home for giving this a watch. Again, if you have any questions or topics you want to see covered, please put them in the comments and we will try to address it. Have a great week.